Let's get into the NFC South. We're going to start off with the Atlanta Falcons. Currently, 7.5 juice to the over -140. I think at DraftKings is where I'm getting most of this information. Plus 250 to win the NFC South, 35-1 to win the NFC, 80-1 to win the Super Bowl. I don't know what to make of this Falcons team, Teddy. We got Michael Penix Jr. in his second year, Raheem Morris, head coach. I just feel like this team had so many opportunities to be better than 8-9 last year, but they just kept faltering, particularly against the spread. 6-10-1. They just burned their backers' money.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, if you like this type of analysis, we really appreciate those likes. Thank you so much. Just click. It's done. Please leave a comment below. I get into the comments multiple times, even on 4th of July week. I'll be in the comments over the next couple of days for sure. Let me know what you think about these AFC and NFC South squads. Happy to respond and offer my take. And if you just want to say hi, you can do that too. And of course, if you haven't done so, what do we have? 200,000 who have subscribed to the WagerTalk YouTube channel, not to mention Instagram, not to mention TikTok. Subscribe, and that way you get instant alerts every time these videos go live. Take advantage, in that regard. And of course, if you don't want to watch us, you can always download this stuff on all your podcast outlets. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm an old guy. I'm just not a podcast guy, but there are guys who are podcast guys. Wherever you download your podcast, WagerTalk Opening Line Report is available. And if you like this show, really appreciate if you tell a friend. You don't ask for much. Tell a friend. Thank you. The Atlanta Falcons last year lined at 9.5 wins. They finished 8-9, as you mentioned. Lots of winnable games that just fell apart down the stretch. The year before, 2023, I had Atlanta over their win total, 8.5. They finished 7-10, and it was the exact same scenario. A ton of games that it felt like they were supposed to win, and the fourth quarter comes around, and they're in a tight game, and they couldn't get the job done. 7-10 the year before that, 7-10 the year before that. It's been a while since the Falcons have been good. They haven't made the playoffs. They haven't made the playoffs since the 28-3, which is obviously a score that if you follow the NFL, you'll always remember. There's never been a Super Bowl like it. Raheem Morris back in his second year as the head coach. Offensive coordinator Zach Robinson returned. New defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich, who worked with Morris before, and he's been the DC for the Jets over the last 4 years. The Jets' collapse last year was not the defense's fault, or certainly not as much as the offense's. And the special teams. Let's not forget how many games their kicker cost them last year. So last year, number 8 yards per play offensively, 5.8 yards per play. So top quartile in that regard. Tied with Cincy, ahead of Washington. A pretty good offense. Slightly below average defense at 5.5 yards per play allowed. -6 in turnovers, not a big deal there. Slightly easier than average schedule last year. Not crazy easy, but slightly easier than average based on my powering numbers the week the game was played. They were number 2 in health last year. Only 65 players saw the field. They're supposed to be better, easier than the schedule, healthy, a good offense, and they weren't. So now the Michael Penix era begins. And Michael Penix had 3 starts last year. He's essentially a rookie. He went 1-2 as a starter. There's an asterisk there. Both losses came in overtime when Atlanta never saw the ball. Kirk Cousins taking up a lot of salary cap dollars. He's sitting on the bench. Atlanta's hoping he'll be traded to the first team that has an injured quarterback. Sometimes that QB can attract a QB like Cousins can attract a lot of attention if a team has a quarterback injury in August or early September. That being said, right now they're paying him big money to sit on the bench, and that's never a good sign for any roster. Bijan Robinson, elite running back. Drake London, elite number 1 receiver. From a skill standpoint, there's not much to be excited about after that. Can we call Kyle Pitts a bust yet? I can. 4 starters return on the offensive line. It's a top 10 unit potential for real. That offensive line looks good on paper. They re-signed Jake Matthews. They re-signed Liam McCullum, the long snapper. Divine Diablo, they signed as a linebacker. Re-signed Mike Hughes. 5th-year GM Terry Fontenot, he's on the hot seat. Morris, too, for that matter. Morris lasted 3 years at his last head coach gig in Tampa, but that included a 10-win season in the middle, that Josh Freeman magic season. Freeman never had another season close. I actually went and looked this up last night. He only threw 6 picks that year. He threw 18 the year before, 22 the year after, and 17 the year after that. And the 1 year he caught magic, and that's the 1 year Raheem Morris had a successful head coaching situation. They lost Grady Jarrett on defense. He was the leader and the oldest vet on this defense, well-respected guy. Matthew Judon, Justin Simmons, some high-priced guys they brought in to win now, they're also gone from the defense. So what does that mean? That means they needed edge rushing. They needed something on the defensive line. They got 2 in the first round with Jalen Walker out of Georgia and James Pierce out of Tennessee. Plus the return of the draft pick last year, Braylon Trice, who tore his ACL and missed the entire season. They brought in Leonard Floyd in free agency. So it's completely remade defensive front for Atlanta. The secondary looks like the strength of the D. AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates returned, 2 high draft picks. Mike Hughes is a free agent. That said, the secondary strength of the defense, they allowed 34 touchdown passes last year. Only Carolina allowed more. There is a youth movement in Atlanta. We talked about some of the guys, Judon and Simmons being gone, Grady Jarrett being gone. It feels like they got a lot younger this offseason and jettisoned some perhaps veteran leadership. We'll see if that works out good or bad for them. From a schedule standpoint, NFC South teams face NFC West and AFC East squads. There are 3 extra games, Minnesota, Washington, and Indy in Berlin. Not necessarily an easy trio. They have a Thursday night football, 2 Sunday night, and a Monday night game. So they're showcased a little bit. They do have the earliest bye possible, week 5. I was really considering Atlanta under. I'm still considering Atlanta under season wins. I'm not high on this team. That said, they have this 7-week span, October through early December. Miami, New England, Indy, Carolina, New Orleans, the Jets, Seattle. That's as easy a stretch as any team has all year in the NFL. And it's probably going to keep me off this under, I should say. But the Falcons, not a team I'm particularly high
on. You mentioned Wednesday, your report for the entire NFL season is going to come out. Tell everybody, if they buy that report, what they're going to receive.
So you're going to there's a part 1 that comes out on Wednesday. When applicable, I add more plays in the preseason after week 2 or week 3, depending. There are years that I've added plays. There are years I haven't. It just depends on what the markets do. So I don't want to promise I'm going to add plays, but there is, in theory, a part 2 of the report based on what we see over the first the games in August. The report traditionally 4, 5, 6 in that range. I've been whittling down the short list for the last month, and it's kind of crunch times and which ones I'm going to use and which ones I'm going to bet and all of that. But in addition to the plays, the write-ups are every bit as important because you're going to find out all these little details and nuances. I spent a lot of time writing them up and talking about the teams and the thought process behind it. And people use those write-ups all year long. And that's another advantage of the season win report. When I'm right, we're betting on these teams and betting against these teams that we have in the win report consistently. And when I'm wrong, we notice it early and we start flipping and go the other way on some of these squads. And that tends to work. I know that there was 1 year that I was like 6 wins off on them, but we made a boatload betting on them all year because I was so wrong and I saw it early. So that can and does happen. So that's what you get with the win report. Again, it's $199 to buy straight. If you want to buy the win report itself, it's free if you get on board with the NFL season package. And obviously today we have that promo code NFL 100. Take $100 off that season package, and you'll get this win report at noon Pacific time on Wednesday, all included. Nothing more to buy, no nonsense in that regard.
All right, let's move along to the Carolina Panthers. I know this is riveting stuff, and this is why Teddy saved these types of teams for last, but we can still make money on them. Teddy, right now, 6.5 is the season win total, minus 125 to the over. 4-1 to win the NFC South, 50-1 to win the NFC, and plus 12,000 to win the Super Bowl. Come on, Panthers, give me something to bet on. We want to bet against this team. We would have bet on this team. This is a Carolina team that has just really been lackluster. Teddy, 5-12 last year, 8-9 against the spread. Bryce Young, they make every single meme about him every single week on the internet about how small he is. There's been no major coaching changes. What is this team going to do differently this year than they've done in years past?
So, I mean, Carolina's been pretty bad this decade. 5-12 in 2021, 7-10 in 2022, 2-15 in 23, 5-12 last year. Although they snuck over their win total last year, lined at 4.5 wins, and that didn't look good early. They got hot down the stretch, and maybe that stretch run for Carolina is what Panthers fans are hoping will continue momentum-wise into this year. As you mentioned, the head coach, the staff, coaching staff is largely back. Second-year head coach Dave Canales is back. Very positive guy. He's the Pete Carroll light in that regard. Everything's great. We're going to be awesome. Second-year OC Brad Idzik is back. Third-year defensive coordinator Jeho Ivero is back. And that's interesting because we're going to talk about this defense. Of course, you have an embarrassing owner situation with David Tepper. Team hasn't made the playoffs since he bought them in 2018. And that's always a concern. 5.1 yards per play offensively last year below average. Much better down the stretch. After a dismal first half, they went 4-5 straight up their last 9 games. That said, listen to some of these defensive numbers. They have the worst defense in the NFL, 6.0 yards per play allowed. 534 points, the most points allowed in a season ever in the history of the league. 31 points now. It's a 17-game season. It's not worst ever for points per game allowed. But it's the most points any team has ever allowed, ever in a season in NFL history. 31 points a game, 31.4. Close to the worst in points per game allowed. They had allowed an NFL high 35 touchdown passes against them. They became only the 4th team in NFL history to allow 3,000 rushing yards against them. And they brought back Ivero. -5 turnovers a year ago. Good for a team with a dicey. It's honestly, it's good for a team with a terrible defense and a dicey QB situation. -5 turnover, we'll call it a positive. Could have been much worse. Strength of schedule last year, one of the toughest in the NFL based on my numbers. Only Cleveland, San Fran, and Pittsburgh faced tougher opponents throughout the course of the weekend. Of course, they had a ton of injuries, a ton of attrition last year. 86 players saw game time for Carolina last year. Most in the NFL. Lots of injuries for this squad and lots of ineffective play. We talk about the offseason. The entire offensive line returns. Bryce Young showed signs in the second half last year. There's continuity with the offense. The receiving corps is as weak as any in the NFL, even after making a number 1 pick on the wide receiver. Tight end room is weak too. They had to overpay J.C. Horn to keep him, a Pro Bowler on this. And think about J.C. Horn. I talked about some of the metrics for this defense as one of the worst in history last year. J.C. Horn was a Pro Bowler on this defense. I felt like they overpaid to keep him. That said, they kept him. New kicker, new punter, special teams question marks. Draft-wise, offseason-wise, they concentrated on defense, rightfully so. Tershawn Watton, Trevon Moehrig, they paid a fair bit of money to bring in a handful of guys on that defense. Wharton on the defensive line, Moehrig in the secondary, Bobby Brown they brought in on the defensive line. And then I talked about, obviously, McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona with the first-round pick, and the edge rusher with the next 2 kids out of Texas A&M and Mississippi, a couple of SEC edge rushers. So they paid some attention to defense in the offseason, to put it mildly. Schedule-wise, NFC South faces NFC West and AFC East teams. There are 3 extra games. Not easy. Dallas, Green Bay, Jacksonville. They have 1 Monday Night Football against San Fran in November. That's it for TV games. And they do have a Week 14 bye. That's the last possible week. Bad news if they get off to a slow start. Carolina certainly doesn't look like they've turned the corner to become a winning team. That being said, there's a little bit of continuity here, and they showed signs offensively last year of being better than they were. Perhaps this year they'll be able to trade points with some of their opponents.
All right, let's talk about the New Orleans Saints, 6.5 plus 160 to the over. If you think the Saints can win 7 games, 12-1, the longest odds to win the NFC South, 121 to win the NFC, and 300-1 to win the Super Bowl. Teddy, I don't know what to make of the Saints team. Let's just break it down for what it is. You've got Kellen Moore in his first year as a head coach. You've got Spencer Rattler in his second year, assuming that he's going to be the starter here. Break this team down in terms of a season win perspective. Maybe say some nice things that the Saints can be looking forward to.
No. So last year, the 5% big ticket was Saints under 7.5 wins. The first 2 weeks, they looked like the best team in football. And then they won 3 games the rest of the year. They finished 5-12. We cashed this one in early to mid-December. It was not a sweat when all was said and done with that 5% big ticket on New Orleans under. And the reason that I was so strong on New Orleans being under, I knew that they had no quality depth. This team's been up against it salary cap wise, and they kept kicking the can down the road. And as soon as the injury started last year, it was a disaster for them. 5.3 yards per play on offense, below average. I mean, middle of the pack, but below average. 5.8 yards per play allowed on defense. Only Chicago, Jacksonville, and Carolina were worse. 30th in total defense. 31st in yards per rush allowed. 4.9 yards per rush allowed. Wasn't a turnover issue last year. -2 in turnovers. Nothing really there. They had a slightly easier than average schedule last year based on my powering numbers. The week the game was played. 2-5 in one-score games a year ago. Slightly more injuries than average. 74 players suited up. The offense really got decimated. The defense stayed reasonably healthy. The first time this year since Sean Payton arrived in 2006 and signed Drew Brees as his new quarterback that they have a new head coach, new QB same year. He talked about Kellen Moore. He was the Eagles offensive coordinator last year. He's going to call his own plays on offense. Brandon Staley. We talked about how a lot of times the rookie head coach is going to bring in a veteran coordinator. Brandon Staley, the former Chargers head coach, comes in and coaches the defense, which is, not what we're seeing from some other squads we talked about today. Off-season moves. Look, your quarterback quit in May. You didn't quit in January. You didn't quit in February. You quit in May. Awfully late. Derek Carr said, yeah, I'm not coming back. It's a legit quarterback battle in theory. The 40th pick, Tyler Shuck. And Shuck dropped as much as he did because he was 26 years old. All right. And he did have 3 season-ending injuries in a very long college career at Oregon, Texas Tech, and Louisville. So he's got an injury history and he's ancient for a rookie. That being said, you talk about it's not about upside. It's about getting through this season, and Shook has the chance to win this job. Spencer Rattler was a rookie last year under a different coaching staff. Jake Hayner's now a third-year pro. Rattler and Hayner are combined 0-7 as starters last year. There's skill position talent on offense. There really is. Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Brandon Cooks. The offensive line looks solid. If Cesar Ruiz and Eric McCoy return from injuries effectively, number 1 pick, the offensive lineman, Kelvin Banks, Outland Trophy winner from Texas. So they've got skill position. They've got an offensive line. See if the quarterback plays okay. Either way, it's going to be a rookie or inexperience at the QB position. But there's at least some room to think that the QB may be able to succeed. Now, the defense is a whole other question. Tons of question mark. Big schematic changes. They're switching defenses, switching to a 3-4. They're counting on 36-year-old Cam Jordan and 36-year-old Demario Davis and 33-year-old Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, his 13th league in the league. I got a lot of concerns about the secondary. Marshawn Lattimore got traded last year. Paulson Debo bolted the Giants in free agency. I like to lose. And they bring in Chase Young as their big free agent signing on offense. Juwan Johnson, I guess, the big on defense, I should say, is the edge rusher. Juwan Johnson, the big free agent signing on offense. And obviously Banks and Shook, the first 2 draft choices on the opposite side of football. The next 4 all came on D. 2025 schedule. NFC South teams face NFC West and AFC East opponents. Their 3 extra games are easy. The Giants, relatively easy. The Giants, the Bears, and the Titans. They are bottom 5 in rest differential this year. It's the only team from these 2 divisions I'm talking about when it comes to rest differential, because it's the only team that something stood out in that regard. Opposing teams have extra rest. They face 3 teams coming off a bye and 1 team coming off a mini bye after playing the previous Thursday. They have 4 2-game road trips, back-to-back road games, which is always difficult for young QBs. No TV games. The schedule's set for irrelevancy. That said, if they're decent, the back half of the schedule, they can make a run. Carolina, Atlanta, Miami, Tampa, Carolina, the Jets, Tennessee, Atlanta, the last 8 games. There's if New Orleans is decent in any way, that's a stretch of opponents they could make some noise against.
The Tampa Bay Bucks, the last team on our list for today, Teddy, 9.5 wins. pretty much minus 110 on both sides. Also minus 110 to win the division, 13-1 to win the NFC, 28-1 to win the Super Bowl. I go to a lot of these guys' games, right? Just kind of like my new hometown team. I really like Baker Mayfield. Head coach Todd Bowles has been excellent, but defensive coordinator Casey Rogers is really just done a great job with this defense. And the old adage is, Teddy, defense wins championships. Do you think that still holds true? And do you think there's any value here on the Bucs getting out of, well, the wild card round this year?
So if there's one team from these two divisions that can make a run, deep run to the playoffs, it's Tampa. I mean, last year lined at 8.5 wins. They finished 10-7. The year before lined at 6.5. They finished 9-8, 8-9 the year before, 13-4 the year before that. 6.2 yards per play offensively a year ago. That's number 4 in the NFL. Only Baltimore, Detroit, and San Fran were better. Those are teams you like to be on the list with. 5.4 yards per play allowed on defense, middle of the pack, -5 in turnovers, not much there. They did face a weaker than average schedule last year. Only a handful of teams, based on my party numbers, were weaker. Cincy, Philadelphia, the Chargers, Indy, Miami, and Washington. They went 2-5 for a playoff team. They went 2-5 in one-score games. That's rare for a first-place team. The Broncos were the only other team that made the postseason that were -3 or worse in one-score games, ended up making the playoffs. They were slightly more injured than average last year. 74 players suited up, but they did win their 4th consecutive NFC South title. Todd Bowles back for his 4th year as head coach. Now, they do lose Liam Cohen to Jacksonville as offensive coordinator, but John Grizzard, the new offensive coordinator, promoted from within. The offensive scheme intact. It's not a new offense for anyone to learn. You talked about Casey Rogers and the defense. He's back for his 4th season, and Bowles is certainly a defensive-minded head coach. Most of the starting lineup returns intact. All 11 on offense are back. It's a top 5 offense with Mayfield last year. It's a top 5 offensive line. Excellent running game with Bucky Irving and Rashad White. The receiving core is as good as any in the league. It really is. The defensive unit with questions. They got star power with Vita Vea at defense tackle. Antoine Winfield's a Pro Bowler last year. They signed Hassan Reddick, re-signed the future Hall of Famer Levante David. But there are depth concerns, at least for me, on all 3 units. If they get banged up, injuries will destroy this defense. They did drafted 2 cornerbacks and 2 red edge rushers after the number 1 pick, Bukba, out of Ohio State, that wide receiver. So they spent a lot of draft capital on the defense side of the football. But the offense looks good. The defense has questions. Feels to me like a team that's going to cash week by week a lot of over bets. They closed out the regular season last year 11-3 to the over in their last 14 games. And that included their 4 games skid, mid-season a year ago. Re-signed Godwin in the offseason, making that, receiving core even better. This team's pretty good. They really are. Schedule-wise, NFC South faces NFC West and AFC East teams. They have 6 games versus their division. All teams lie to 7.5 wins or lower. They went 4-2 in division last year. They could do better than that this year. The Jets, the only other team on their schedule, though, lined lower than 8.5 wins. There are 3 extra games. Houston, Philly, Detroit. Compare that to everyone in the division. The Bucs have a much tougher schedule in that regard. We'll see them on TV. They got a couple of Monday night games and a Sunday night games. Tampa, the best team in the division by a fairly wide margin. The toughest schedule in the division by a fairly wide margin.
All right, that is the AFC and NFC South. As Teddy mentioned, we'll be back on August 4th to get into the preseason all the way through the end of Super Bowl. Teddy, before we let our audience go, any parting words, thoughts? Let's hear it.
Sure. We appreciate the likes, follows, and comments very, very much. The NFL win report, season win report, again, 103-52 lifetime, 17-4 with the big tickets. It comes out 2 days from now on Wednesday, July 2nd. Don't buy the report. Get my season package instead. Promo code NFL100 will take $100 off the full season package. Take advantage of that right now on my homepage, wt.buzz/TC. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Really appreciate all the positive feedback. Best of luck with all your bets. And we'll talk to you again after this little break for the report to be released, and then a little bit of time to enjoy the summer.